Hi, everybody. I think we might make a start. 6 o'clock, get going. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Jacobs. I'm Vice Commodore, and I've just taken over from Tom over here, Director Tom Barker, the Chair of the Sailing Committee. Tom's left me very large shoes to fill, and I'm hoping I can achieve what Tom's achieved. So tonight, let me just outline what we're going to do. Well, first of all, some welcomes. Welcome to all of you. Particular welcome to Jason Smithwick and Jenny Howells, who is from RORC, and they're online from London. Have we got any other of our board members online? If we have, welcome to them. The agenda tonight, Tom is going to take you through just a summary of the two key changes from RORC, and also a little bit about our Cat 3 race now that we've introduced. And then we'll pass over to Jason and Jenny. They're going to talk for about 15, 20 minutes on the rule changes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. Okay, so with that, Tom.
Thanks, David. So welcome everyone, and thanks very much for coming along, and also to those online. Thanks for joining us. So I'll only speak very briefly because I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for our friends over in the UK, Jason and Jenny. However, I thought it would be wise to provide a bit of context around some of the major changes to the upcoming summer program for the CYCA. And really, there's three key things that I just wanted to outline. Firstly, the introduction of standard IRC certificates into our club racing, and that's obviously a major focus of the update from Jenny and Jason later on. The revision of the Flinders Island and the Bird Island safety categories from Category 2 to Category 3+, and the introduction of a new point score, being the coastal point score. So I'll elaborate on these 3 points in just a second, but the overall context is that the board, and in particular the Sailing Committee, for the last number of years have been particularly focused on how do we look at and manage and improve the pathways both into our major blue water events, including the Rolex Sydney Hobart, and also helping those who are maybe not racing in the major blue water events but still want to continue some offshore racing. Particularly thinking about things like barriers to entry, the costs and the complexity of this racing. It's been a major focus for us, and really these three things that we'll talk about this evening are at the core of those updates. So firstly, and importantly, before I go into the details of each, importantly, it's not done yet, right? These are three changes that we've made for this year, but as Commodore Sam Haynes announced at the AGM just last week, the club is undertaking a process of reviewing our strategy, and I'm sure some of the things that we learn and look at through this season will feed into that strategic review again in reducing those barriers to entry and improving those pathways. So it's a work in progress, but hopefully this season is seen as a step in the right direction. So firstly, around IRC standard certificates and the club's point, the club very much welcomed the decision by Australian Sailing earlier this year to adopt standard certificates here in Australia, and I acknowledge that I think we've got a number of Australian Sailing representatives online this evening, and I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the close relationship we have with Australian Sailing, particularly through the Owners Working Committee chaired by Siobhan Brulin. So thank you very much to our friends at Australian Sailing. But in terms of IRC standard certificates, we really see this as an opportunity for yachts and owners to get their foot in the door of racing under a rating system, perhaps with some reducing some of the complexity associated with a fully rated endorsed certificate, or sorry, to be more precise, a fully measured endorsed certificate. So the fact that there might be other data sources, and I'll leave the details to Jason and Jenny, but other data sources, for example, for hull weights and hull measurements, or owner submitted data for sail measurements, for example, we see as a great opportunity. We have adopted a position that we would allow for standard certificates in our racing here at the CYCA for our category 4 to 7 racing. So all of our inshore racing that is done under IRC, as well as our short offshore point score, our short haul point score, and our ocean point score. I want to take a moment to be really clear that it is not the intent of the CYC to have anything but endorsed certificates for our major blue water racing, including the Noak Sydney Gold Coast race and the Rolex Sydney Hobart race. So blue water point score, Cat 1 and Cat 2 racing is intended to be remained as rating under endorsed certificates. Again, emphasising that point about the pathway into blue water events. So that's the context of our choice and decision around, and the position we've taken around IRC standard. You know, we'll continue to watch and monitor that. But how great will it be for some of our events like Spring Point Score and the Winter Series that we've also introduced IRC divisions into to allow people to race under a standard certificate as well. So item number 2, in regards to the Flinders Island race and the Bird Island race, these are long-standing events on the club calendar, as many of you would be competitors in and know too well. So again, on the basis of looking at opportunities to reduce some of those pathways, we saw these 2 80 and 90 nautical mile races, obviously still part of the blue water point score, but people might choose to do 1 or 2 of those races without doing the entire point score. And so by adopting a category 3 plus safety requirement, we feel as though it helps reduce some of those smaller barriers of entry. And hopefully for a 90-mile race, that is seen as a good entry point for some overnight racing. That point around category 3 plus then leads on to the third point, which is the coastal point score. So thinking about how people come up into blue water racing, we identify or recognise that some boats, some owners may want to do a few blue water races before they commit to a whole season. And so the idea of the coastal point score this year is that it'll be made up of 4 races, and it's a combination of some of our ocean point score races and those 2 blue water races that I just mentioned. So the ocean point score races that would be part of this new coastal point score would be the Lion Island race and also the Port Hacking race. So those 2, 30, 40-mile races, supplemented by the 2 80 and 90 nautical mile races being Bird Island and Flinders Island, will make up the new point score known as the coastal point score. We see quite a lot of crossover of the ocean point score and blue water events, so we sort of feel that there's actually already a pre-plugged fleet here, but hopefully it might also mean that some of the ocean point score competitors may wish and choose to do those shorter blue water races, and this way we've wrapped a point score around that to hopefully encourage that. So that's a little bit of context of those major changes. Hopefully that sets the scene a little bit for this evening's discussion. But with that, I might suggest we hold any Q&A until the back end, and I would want to take away from Jason and Jenny's time. So with that, happy to take questions at the back end, but I will leave it there and pass on to Jason and Jenny, who are basically going to cover 2 key items, as David said: changes to this year's IRC rule, and then an overview of comparison and difference between endorsed certificates and standard certificates. So look forward to chatting a bit later in the Q&A, but hopefully that provides some context for our choices and decisions so far. Thanks, everyone.
So we a big head on the screen as normal then for the meeting, and just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay, to make our heads a little bit smaller, and we'll go through a short presentation, hopefully not death by the PowerPoint. So hopefully you'll be able to go ahead and see that screen. So yes, I'm Jason Smithwick. I'm director of the RORC Rating Office, but also look after IRC worldwide with our partners, the Yacht Club de France, who jointly own the rule. My colleague Jenny Howells has joined us. She is the technical manager for RORC. She's been a technical manager for many years. I won't embarrass her, but and she really is the font of IRC knowledge. And also she looks after Australia specifically. So all your certificates are generally processed by Jen. That's why she's here, and she certainly knows. She can certainly enlighten us more on the standard certificate process. So interject when you're ready, Jen, if you've got anything to say.
Thanks.
But,
Thanks, Jason.
So just as a brief introduction, I'll just show you a couple of recent sort of IRC developments in our resources, and then I'll go through the rule changes with you, which may be teaching you to suck eggs, but it's good to sort of clarify some of them. Particularly, I've got a couple of slides on number of head sales, which I'm sure you're all intrigued about, and getting your certificates this year already. And then just talk to you about what we're working on, as what you'll see in your rating certificates this year, and then also what we're working on as a technical committee for the 2025 season, which is it's a year away for you guys at the moment. And then we'll go on to talk more about IRC standard certificates. So just as a reminder, on our website, if you go to IRC Racing and drop down to valid boat data, you'll see a search page where you can look at any boat's sort of page 2 certificate. That's the boat data now, so it's all publicly available. That's all the sail data, the rig data, and basically anything that you would want to know or want to inspect at an event is available to you as a publicly now. So there's no there's also the online TCC listings that still exists, and that's actually the main source for TCC. We didn't want two sources for the rating. So if you go to the valid rating listings, you'll see the normal table that we've got. But that table now also includes number of head sails, number of spinnakers, and number of flying head sails in that table. But that's also shown on the palette page 2 as well. But it's useful when you're using, let's say, a scoring program or a race entry program. You can now reference those numbers too. We do with our Sail Race HQ at RORC. And in fact, we also link every boat because the URL is unique for every boat. So everybody can see each other's boat on the Sail Race HQ system, which is our RORC race management system. And then I just want to remind you, we regularly update our race management manual. It's got a lot of information, mainly to organisers, but also it's pretty useful for sailors to and see the options available with IRC. That's available on going through our race management section of our website. And of course, our measurement manual is also available, which becomes more important when we start talking about standard certificates, if you want to know how to submit data yourself from a measurement point. But it's not that complicated, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. So this year we've got quite a number of rule changes related to all the topics you can see on the screen. And like I said, we did a little bit of work around sails, so you'll see all the setting of sails, sail measurement stamps, and number of head sails, particularly as a sort of significant changes for this year. And I'll talk you through them hopefully slowly, but I'm ready to take questions, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions at the end. So just a first sort of point is just a clarification. We basically wanted to say that any system on board has to be fully operational and not just there to tick a box in a rating term. We've seen some instances where people could point at a cool box and call it an installed refrigerator, and that's not really where we would want to tick the refrigerator box, let's say, in rating terms. So we basically say that all systems related to living, eating, and sleeping and stowage shall operate as to provide the service function normally associated with that system. So that's just a clarification, and it helps particularly measurers when they're going around looking at boats to point at that rule and say, look, that's not something that we want to say that exists on board related to accommodation mainly. It's quite simple. And then the movable ballast. There's been a lot of discussion, particularly around, let's say, stacking and stacking of sails and equipment on board. And we wanted to clarify in IRC that, you know, Racing Rule 51 applies. And so basically moving sails or equipment while racing with intention of improving performance is prohibited. And I understand that's also in the CYCA notice of race in some form too. But you can change this from the notice of race. And where you may want to change this is, for example, you know, if in France they have lots of class 40s racing and they are actually permitted to stack in their class. And if you've got a class 40 within a class 40 class within IRC, or you want to allow stacking, then you know, this permits you to do that within the notice of race. Out of interest, we continue at RORC to deliberate the stacking idea, and you know, because it's understood that it happens a lot and it shouldn't be happening. And in what way, if you were to allow it, would you permit that within the notice of race? But we're not getting anywhere at the moment. It's going around in circles, as you can imagine, because it's a pretty tricky situation. Fundamentally, it's illegal at the moment in terms of racing. And then setting of sails. I mean, this may for you guys, particularly at the CYCA, strike a bit of a chord, because you know, there was obviously a lot of questions surrounding setting of sails, particularly with the last Sydney Hobarts. And so we wanted to clarify that, you know, what the situation is with IRC, and it's no different. We haven't changed it in any way. It's very much as you would expect, and as was permitted in the racing. So basically, we say the tack of the head sail between the forestay and the mast. So any sail on the forestay or after it may be off the boat centre plane, but shall be inboard the shear line. So that's basically, say, you can tack a stay sail, you know, where you like within that sort of triangle, let's say. But the tack of a head sail set in front of the forestay, i.e. you can tack a head sail in front of the forestay, that's okay, shall be approximately on the boat centre plane, except when it's tacked on a bowsprit that is rated as articulating, because we do rate articulating bowsprits independently. So this amends the Racing Rules 54. So basically it permits, you know, as you would expect, a spinnaker stay sail to be set while reaching in any sort of situation. Do shout at me, Jen, if I'm not telling them the whole story.
That's all right. You're doing okay.
Thanks. And then whizzing through, we've got the flying head sail. As you know, we had a few years ago, we introduced a sail to sort of be that halfway sail between what we would call a large head sail, or a code 0, let's say, and a spinnaker. And that gets rated differently. And it used to be a 62.5%. And we're not finding that people are really pushing the rule. It's not becoming a sail that can be used extensively upwind. And so we wanted to drop it down to make it even more useful as a sail, down to 60% of the foot length. So anything with a half width to foot length ratio less than 60% is basically a head sail. 60 to 75 is a flying head sail, and then 75 above, of course, is a spinnaker. So that's the full sort of forward sails options within the IRC. The rating of that hasn't changed in this year either. It's pretty penal, but we don't want everybody thinking we have to go get one. But it is useful, and we're seeing more of them introduced in the fleet, but not at an alarming rate, let's say. And then number of head sails. So so from this year, from June in your year, we've obviously started this in January already. We rate the number of head sails carried on board exactly the same as the number of spinnakers. So if I was to jump on board and count the sails, that's the number that we would expect to have on your certificate. Obviously, multiple head sails can give a distinct advantage, you know, in the flexibility of the sail wardrobe and the ability to increase area by setting multiple head sails. We didn't want to go through the whole, trying to predict the number of head sails you may fly at any one point, or try and make people start counting number of head sails flown at any time, because that can be pretty ambiguous. So we want to just keep it simple, much like the spinnakers, and when we pull you off at the dock and count them, then we know that you comply with the requirement. So just to be clear, the heavy weather jib and a storm jib, in accordance with the offshore special regs, is not included in the head sail number count. That's one of each, not a multiple of each, just one of each. So you can count. So if I counted them and you showed me the heavy weather jib and the storm jib in their bags, I'd pull them away and then count the rest of the sails. All other head sails, including your stay sails, your reaching sails, your pros, modes, whatever they're called, are included. So any sail that measures as a head sail, apart from one storm jib and one heavy weather jib, is included in the count. We've changed the furling head sail allowance a bit because, of course, now you're counting sails. It's easier to not have the two options. So the heavy weather jib is incorporated into the framework already, and this is to simplify the rule, because it was pretty confusing for us, let alone for people who were trying to sail with it. So we tried to simplify it. And then obviously we'll ask you the number of head sails upon your application. You probably those of you who have revalidated for our friends at Australian Sailing will already have been asked this question. And then it's obviously printed on the certificate. And like I said, it's also shown on the listing now for the data, and also on your page 2 if you ever look at a boat. I wanted just to talk to you briefly about heavy weather jibs and storm jibs. There's some work being done at world sailing level, particularly with the offshore special regs, because of course, not just because of this rule, other rating systems also limit the number of sails you can carry on board, and they don't include the heavy weather jib and the storm jib in their count. But people are obviously, trying to find ways around this. We're seeing, boats that the OSR, all it says is suitable for purpose. Well, that's a bit ambiguous, and I don't know how a OSR inspector could actually even inspect that. So I understand that they're looking at making it clearer what the purpose is of a storm jib and a heavy weather jib. But of course, it's all in submission land, and pending, and we have to go through all the committees. So don't hold your breath. But we may see some changes in the future for being more clear about the importance and the function of a heavy weather jib and a storm jib. And we, of course, support this. We don't want people creating light stay sails and then pointing at it in the boat and saying it's going to be their storm jib. It's about safety. But we're seeing more and more people exploit the OSR at the expense of safety, which is worrying. So, number of head sails. There's around 1 point per sail, basically. It's not in the code just 1 point for every sail. There's quite a lot of functionality. It does go up in the way that it depends on the length of the boat. Well, length is the primary driver actually, but how it increases with the length when you have more head sails with the length of the boat is different for the size. And not being very clear, let's just go through that again. 1 point per sail around, similar to spinnakers, but the primary base number of head sails, let's say, where you don't see a rating change, is based on the length of the boat. So a 10-meter boat will sort of see a minimal rating change for around 3 or 4 head sails, whereas a 15-meter boat will see a minimal rating change for around 4 to 5. And when I say minimal rating change, that's from what you would expect from last year. But of course, there's other rating changes that are going on as well. So, if you see more numbers change, then it could be related to your age date. It could be related to some other factors that I'll talk to you in a moment. So that's it. And then also there's a Q&A on our website under measurement. Excuse me. So rating formulation changes. For 2024, obviously, we talked about the number of head sails. Sorry, excuse me, got a frog in my throat. Then we've also looked at some rig types on small boats, and we found that carbon rigs were rated a bit penally on some very small boats. And then the terrible spinnaker poles and bowsprits, they still haunt us. People trying different configurations, rate the non-spinnaker rating when you have all these different configurations. So we're just clearing up some little bits of code there this year, particularly also with the length of the bowsprit in that section, because we were finding you could just go really long on bowsprits without, if you had a spinnaker pole already, without much rating change, and we're making sure that that doesn't that's sort of caught in the code as well. And then what we're working on this year is looking at rating sustainable hull materials, flax and eco resins and things like that. So that's all part of hull factor. We're trying to incorporate that, see where that lies in the spectrum from heavy wood to Nomex carbon, basically. And then we keep on looking at hull factor. We'd love to call it boat factor, but people are so used to the term hull factor, but it is boat factor. It includes a lot of other factors, just length and displacement, let's say, as we know. Includes keels and rudders and appendages, and it's all there as a big formulation. We don't make it up. We tick a lot of boxes, and out drops a number. And then keel type evaluation, just trying to make sure there's a smooth curve between all the different keel types we can see, which of course is difficult in many different options we see with foots and bulbs and no bulbs, and we're just making sure it's as smooth as possible. So we're still working on that. We may not see anything for that this year. We're keeping on working on it, but it's quite a long project. We're looking at planing hull, particularly with the idea of the scow bows, the class 40s that we're seeing, it's moving into other areas now. And we just want to make sure that we're rating that correctly. The overhangs and the waterline length can look a bit short in rating terms. And so I'm trying to pick all that up in a formulation. In their infinite wisdom, the Maxi Association now they love their water ballast because it's reducing the number of crews, and they believe it's sort of it's advantageous in terms of rating. But because they're increasing water ballast, they're reducing the depth of their keel. Now they haven't got enough lift, so they're looking at putting trim tabs on the boats, on the keels. So we go around in an infinite circle. So we're looking at rating the trim tabs and how we do that. But we want to be careful because, of course, if you think about it, we've got a lot of meter boats, 12 meters, 8 meters, that have trim tabs on their keels. And so we don't want to, they're rated back pretty well at the moment, so we don't want to click them into a higher rating by accident. As with all this, we do all our changes, and we will run a fleet run of 10 up to 10,000 boats, and all the boats will drop out. And when you see a boat that does particularly well and its rating drops, put your head in your hands and you have to start again. So we want to make sure that it's fair for everybody and looks after the current fleet of the whole IRC fleet as well. And so then we go on to standard certificates. I guess I've got Jenny's here as well, because she does a lot of the work when it comes to, particularly when you apply for a standard certificate. She and the team in the UK and in France, we're always talking to each other and have a lot of data available to our fingertips. We've just moved office, and when we did that, we also moved quite a number of filing cabinets, because we still use the old paper files that we can find from years and years ago. Are very useful to us rather than just relying on internet. Jenny used to attend every boat show picking up brochures so that we could have the data available for our standard hull data.
Yeah. We're still using them.
Yeah, yes. Dr. Jenny's left as we speak. And so just to be clear, standard certificates are nothing new. IRC is 40 years old this year, and it's been available for 40 years. So, but it is new to Australia. I think there was in the midst of time. I wouldn't like to recount the history too much. There was, everybody thought we should be endorsed in Australia, and so that's where they started, and that's where you are now. But now there's available for standard hull data, and it's not a different process to being endorsed. It's just we use different data. The process is the same, other than the team in the office will do a very careful sense check on data. We don't rely on face value data. Of course, it's always great when we get we get sale makers to send us a certificate also, or their data so we rely on that. That's good. And so and you don't have to be fully endorsed. You don't have to be. You can have your sales measured and not use standard hold data, for example. So go ahead.
I was just going to say a standard certificate doesn't mean that nothing's been measured. It might be one measurement that needs taking that removes an endorsement off a boat, for instance. So yeah, it's not an all or nothing situation. And processing standard certificates is really no different to the endorsed ones. It's probably more work because we have to do more checks against where the data's come from, which is why we always ask for the source of data on the application form, so we can get a sense of where it's come from and how much we need to check into it, and then we'll look at sister ships and specifications and any other evidence we've got, other rating certificates, that sort of thing. So probably, there's probably more work at our end goes into a standard checking standard applications than endorsed applications. So although we do checks.
And I saw our colleague Glenn posted about standard certificates, and it was great reading the comments because people were making it up. Suddenly you can rate a 50-foot boat as a 30-foot boat, or a catamaran as a monohull. I was laughing at that. We're not just it's not a computer just taking an application and processing it. And to be clear also, I know that the CYCA and all the blue water events are still requiring endorsed, and that's great, and I actually encourage that. But in the UK, the only real requirement for endorsement is our national championships and a few other small events. But the Fastnet race, we don't require endorsed. But I've never seen a boat that's not endorsed or to have a standard certificate win or even come close to winning the Fastnet. Because
a lot of those, they want endorsement so that they know their data's correct. So it's their choice rather than a requirement. Yeah.
And often, if you weigh your boat, not always, please, not always, but if you weigh your boat, your weight will go up from the standard certificate weight, because we're using the statistically significant low weight, not the minimum weight for all the fleet, but a more significant one. So that's sort of introducing it and maybe doing the sell, but we're just trying to emphasize that this is not new to us. But so IRC obviously accepts owner declaration of a boat's measurements, and all you need to do is fill in the application form and send it to your rule authority, Australian Sailing in your case. Obviously, there's no requirement to have the boat weighed or measured, but like Jen says, any weights or measurements or part measurements that we accept will help the endorsement eventually, or help the standard certificate being processed. And then we have standard hull data available. There's quite a few boats on our website where we would use the standard data, which is displacement, length, draft, overhangs for that boat as a starting point. And if there's good reason, the weight might change. Sorry, Jenny, go ahead.
That's right.
No, okay. Then we'll adjust the overhangs and in a parallel sinkage term, and then and then we'll rate the boat.
Yeah. I was going to say that on the IRC website as well, in the measurement section, there's a bit called acceptable sources of data, which is useful for anyone applying for a standard certificate, because it tells you what kind of sources will be accepted or not accepted for, hull and rig measurement, sales, weight. Things not acceptable is registered tonnage and that sort of thing. So that's a useful page for anyone applying for a standard certificate to have a look at and see if what they're proposing might be acceptable. Hopefully will be acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah. Jen will say no if there's any doubt.
Yeah, or at least we ask a lot of questions sometimes, and it's not because we just want to get things right. So yeah. And
I think we've basically been through this slide in what we've said. Obviously Australian Sailing may do their own checks, and then they pass it on to us where we do our checks against our extensive database and make sure that we're happy with the data. And actually, out of interest, even this year, we're doing a little bit more work on sail sizes for boats, using machine learning and AI to basically predict what the sail size should be for that boat, using its sort of the boat primary dimensions, and to start flagging up more when we see suspicious applications for sail sizes. And it works pretty well. Not spinnakers actually, but mainsails and head sails it predicts it pretty accurately in general.
The other thing we sometimes ask for, it's usually for one-offs or for modified boats or designs that we might not know so much about, is we'll often ask for photographs so that, a picture tells 1,000 words, as it is say. So it's not specific to, it doesn't mean we're picking on somebody. It's just our standard way of getting a proper idea of what the boat is if it's something that we don't know about. So, yeah. Don't take it personally.
No, please.
Yeah.
And I guess for us, that's the end. We'll let you get to some questions, but this is the team at the rating office. This is our old office outside the swimming pool in Leamington. And obviously we're supported by Emma and Sally and a whole network of measurers and volunteers and people helping us around the team. But this is us looking corporate in our gear. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason and Jenny. You look a very happy team in that last photograph. So now we're going to go to questions and answers. We're going to try and finish at 7, but if we've got lots of good questions, we might just dribble over for a few more minutes. We've got people online. So for the people online, if you have questions, if you can type them, and Tara will receive them and then state them so we can hear the answers. For those of you in the room, could I ask you just to put your hand up? I'll recognise you. Tara will bring over the microphone so that people online can hear your question, and then state your question. So, who would like to ask the first question? Please.
Thank you. Paul Benroe from Macquarie Auckland. I'm an AS measurer. At Lake Macquarie, there's been a problem getting out of the channel, and there's quite a few boats that have let their IRC certificates lapse. My question is, if they want to get a fully endorsed certificate, can they use the old measurements, or do they need to be remeasured?
That might depend how old the old measurements are, and obviously whether anything's changed on the boat. It's usually I would say I'd judge that on a case-by-case basis. So is the answer. Yes, we might be able to use the old measurements. So it'll be up to Australian Sailing as well, what they're, if they have a policy on that as well. But
well, I've got a certificate in front of me from 2016. Is that too old?
Not for the certificate, but it should say on it as well when the measurements were done. So it's more about when the last measurement was done. And
it's 2014.
Yeah. Okay. And whether the ownership's changed and that sort of thing.
Owner's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, generally if the sale's the same, or we could switch it to standard.
Yes. Probably yes, but without looking further into the individual case, I wouldn't want to say categorically yes. And obviously Australian Sailing might have a view as well. So
I'm encouraging him to get his boat weighed for a start. Check the overhangs. The other question is, there's been a bit of a question up there about how long it takes to get the IRC certificate done from the time you put the measurements in.
Well, from when we receive it, because obviously we receive it from Australian Sailing, it's usually a couple of weeks, I'd say, unless the expedited processing is requested, and then it's done within 2 or 3 days. But I don't know how long. I don't know how long the admin process takes at the Australian end, so I can't comment on that.
Afternoon, Good morning, people in London. Andrew Buckland's my name. I've just been looking at a couple of things for some clients. I do some work in the space. Interested in the description of packing down of stay source. And if I can go back in history a long way, for example, under the old rule, IMS used to restrict how long the tax drop was on the blooper. And I see your interpretation now is tacked inside the gunnel, basically. How would that apply if I had an old IOR boat?
You mean with a tax drop, actually, is what you were saying?
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, the old IMS rule, as I recall, had, or the IOR rule, as I recall, had a tax drop length limit. So you're saying now the tack of the sail, how defined, must be on the gunnel, basically.
Yeah, and that and tack is defined as a term in the equipment rules of sailing as the area around that area, the tack point. And so, yeah, if the tack point's outside the gunnel, my initial reaction is that would not comply. But I think if you wanted a rule clarification, I think we better not answer this live and get a question from you in writing. But that would be my initial reaction. Is the tack area? Tack is absolutely defined in the equipment rules of sailing.
So there's a couple online, which I'll just go through quickly. The first is, can you use your ORC club certificate information to produce a standard IRC?
Yes and no. It will depend.
Go on, Jen.
It would depend on how good we think the ORC club data is, whether the boat was actually measured or whether it's, yeah, they vary in quality quite substantially. So it would depend. What were you going to say, Jason?
Well, yeah, I was going to say that generally, you know, we won't, particularly if we've got standard hull data, then it becomes easier then to create an ORC club certificate, because then you're primarily focused with the sail data. And then, you know, generally the sail data is not too bad on the club certificate. It tends to be the actual sail data.
Yeah, it's more the hull data that
the hull data is
can vary.
Yeah.
Yes.
Particularly overhangs can be pretty spurious in terms of waterline length. Yeah, we don't agree often with their waterline length, which of course is an important driver for in terms of rating and speed.
Of course, there are some club certificates which were previously ORCI certificates, and the owners decided they just want to pay for a club certificate, but the boat has been fully measured. So, you know, that's a different case. But yeah, a lot of these things, there isn't an overarching rule about it. You know, it's a lot of it depends on the case in question. So
the general sort of philosophy is get a certificate for this owner, and that's so we'll do everything we can to make it work, but not at the expense of the sport.
No.
The next is just whether there's any way to access historical IRC certificates online now that you've updated them to include the current ones.
Yeah, we went through that in our head. Obviously, we've only just started this process of where what we call the page 2 or the boat data page is available. So that's only from January 2024. The primary concern, of course, is the confusion over what is the current valid certificate. You know, a boat could have, let's say, 3 or 4 amendments or updates throughout the year, and if you kept all those certificates online, you would never, an event organizer or a measurer or another competitor would never know what configuration they're in. So we're going to generally try and keep it as the current valid certificate, but we can always access historical certificates for any owner if they come through and request one.
Well, but for copy certificates, we only supply the most recent valid certificate. So we don't go back into historical ones. If it's the owner of the specific boat who's looking for some history of their boat, then we'll look at it. So again, yeah, if they put in a request, then yes.
Can you get trial standard certificates in the same way you can get trial endorsed certificates?
Yeah, absolutely. None of that is different at all. It's all the same. Yeah, trial certificates, amendments. Yeah, the only difference is you don't have endorsed written on your certificate. So, yeah.
And the final one was, is the impact of the age of a boat on a rating publicly available?
The short answer is no, and that's obviously the philosophy of the undisclosed IRC. But it's again, it's generally a point and a half a year. You'll see, and it goes down to at that rate for about let's say 20 years, and then after that it goes down a slower rate, and that's that's just generally the sort of formulation. It's not exactly very complicated. There are some other considerations within the boat itself that may affect that, but otherwise it's yeah, pretty simple. But we don't publish it.
Sorry, there's one more.
I like the comment about it's the boat age, not the owner's age. Maybe we should start rating that.
Sorry, one more has just popped up. Can you declare 5 head stalls and pick on the day which you carry within that total 5 when you have a greater number to pick from?
So it depends on the notice of race. So if you were doing a single offshore race, the answer is yes. You can, if you've rated for 5 head sails, then you can choose the 5 head sails that you wish to take. Obviously, the largest head sail has to be the same size or smaller than the rated largest head sail. The rest of them is the wardrobe is up to you. But when it comes to a series of events where the notice of race specifically, is either quiet or mentions that you must have the same sails throughout the series, then you have to carry those same 5 head sails. It's a good question because we've had our IRC nationals this year. They stated that you could rate, you could change head sails on a daily basis. I.e., once you leave the dock and come back, you have to keep the same head sails on board. You can't have a rib delivering you sails throughout the race. But that subsequently meant that a lot of boats rated with a small number of head sails because they were choosing on a daily basis for inshore racing. And I don't advise doing that because it was not popular, and it was definitely the rich get richer in that situation. There was Carl Kwok in his TP52 with 2 containers probably full of equipment and sails. So we have to be careful about that, and I recommend that particularly on a series of races, on a multi-day event, that we keep it the same, such that people may rate with 5 head sails, and therefore they need to keep those same 5 head sails the same. One thing, it's just an added complication, is that it's whether you make them carry all 5 head sails or whether they can only carry 3 on that day. For example, we don't want, in terms of people, particularly smaller boats, sports boats and things like that, they may want to have rate for 3, but they only want to carry 1 or 2, particularly as you'll stamp all over them, and there'll be you could ruin them pretty quickly. And so an event may be descriptive and say that you don't have to carry all the head sails that you're rated for. That's one other option. I hope that's clear.
Thanks. Yes, thanks, Jason and Jenny. Very informative. I'm just wondering, sorry, Malcolm Rowe from the CYC. Can you expand on the furling headsail allowance? I guess a couple of questions in that regard. Is that still a consideration? And in the past, it's only considered headsails above 130%, whereas many modern designs are obviously non-overlapping. So.
Yeah, so the furling head sail allowance basically there used to be 2 levels. One was just a furling head sail, or the other one was to carry a furling head sail and a heavy weather sail. And because the heavy weather sail is always included in the count, we've removed that option. So there's just the furling head sail allowance occurs, and you can of course always carry a heavy weather. You can carry a safety sail. We didn't want to start people thinking whether they should be carrying a safety sail or not. Now the overlap, it still exists because what we're trying to do is the furling head sail is generous. And we're trying to, really encourage the sort of cruiser racers guys that generally have quite a large overlapping head sail. So you need to have that overlap of 130% to be rated for that.
Yeah, hi James and Jenny. Shane Ganaria from Doyle Sales in Sydney. just on the heavy weather jib and storm jib rule, your slide showed it wasn't quite, well, just a clarification on that. You're saying that heavy weather jibs and storm jibs aren't included in the jib number, but that only applies for races where the safety category would require those sails, or can we go to a Cat 5 event like Hamilton Island and put on a heavy weather jib that comes outside our Hetzel number?
So in general, you could still carry those sails. Why not? You know, if you want, they're safety sails, so it's up to you whether you carry them or not. But I can understand the advantage that you could obtain from having those in a lighter weather, sorry, in an inshore race. So it may be that the notice of race for those races may want to consider that in the future. But in general, you know, we don't. IRC won't prohibit you from carrying a safety sail.
Any more questions? Any more online, Tara? Nope. Going once, going twice. Yes. Just before the hammer falls.
Hi there, Wade Morgan here from Sydney, Newcastle. I've got a question. It was reassuring to hear your position on scrutineering for standard certificates and the fact that you guys have a good look at the data and make sure that there's no anomalies. I suppose the question is, where do you stand on relation to that, enforcing that sort of same standard on endorsed certificates?
Yeah, we don't take endorsed data at face value either. Chris at Australian Sailing will know that I will come back with questions and say, you sure there's not a typo here, or that doesn't look right, or so we do sense checks on every application we get. Basically, it doesn't matter whether it's endorsed or standard. So that's the short answer. Yeah.
Is that
it's always going through?
Sorry, go ahead.
It's always going through a human, put it that way. An experienced human.
Yeah.
I guess down here in Sydney, I could speak for a few people that I know who aren't sure that does always happen. And not because of, if there's no protocol for it, for example, then it's very difficult to know what people would look for, etc., because there are discrepancies that get around, and there are boats with endorsed certificates that are winning big races that are 13 years old. There are lots of things that are kind of in conflict with what you said today about the standard certificate. So, you know, I know that there's a portion of people in Australia, and I'll just put the elephant in the room, that would like to see a bit more scrutineering around that and make sure that things are correct. Because if there are anomalies, there can be scale errors, there can be mistakes, and, you know, that's human nature, and everyone's very supportive of the rule down here. We love it. And, you know, I've been racing all over the world for 20 years under it. I enjoy it too. But if there are any question marks over it and the scrutineering is not, you know, always correct, then, you know, I think a lot of people down here would love to see a protocol written that we can adhere to. That could go from weighing to whatever.
So we do have quite a lot of information. In fact, we've just updated our endorsement standards document on our website. So the information is available, but I do understand that there's, you know, there's just so much information. It's hard to, you know, to wade through, and we try and work with the rule authorities to be like our first line of defense, of which Australian Sailing is one of the best in doing that. And so, and we're always got the sport at mind, but I take your point, and we do enjoy the support of Australia greatly with IRC. So yeah, thank you for those comments. But I guess there's not really a but. We do everything in our power to make sure that the weight, all the measurements are on the boat are correct, and they, like I said, they do get sense checked regularly. One problem that we probably see more than ever is how long does an endorsed certificate last for? And in Australia, that's always been a lot of pressure because of, you know, you have to have an endorsed certificate. So, for example, if you were weighed in 2014, like, you know, this boat that we mentioned earlier, you know, if we offered them a standard certificate now, that might be more acceptable. understanding that they may not be able to race in some of the premier events. But if that's the racing they want to do, then they wouldn't be so concerned. Whereas before standard certificates were available, they would have had to then, had the pressure to go get weighed, and they may not have simply done that and gone racing. And let's face it, this is all about getting people on the water and getting them racing. So that's
100% agree. It's all about getting people racing, that's for sure. But there is a sector of us who are in the Grand Prix world where it's more than that. And, I think that the criteria to protest is very, very difficult. It's very, very wide tolerances. So in closing, I mean, it's not anything else. I support the rule and I think it's great. But if there's any way to just lock down a bit of that scrutineering to make sure that lots of boats throughout the fleet were within their tolerance, which is less than the protestable limit, then I think that'd make for a more harmonious fleet.
So are you talking more about equipment inspection at events, or are you talking about, the limitations of what we can check on a paper application compared to what somebody can check on an actual boat?
No, it's more around the measurement earlier, because a lot of the tolerances for protesting are very large. And I don't think a lot of boats are outside of those. But the acceptable error when you measure for me is 0. So everything from that's a mistake. So if we can try and have the errors at 0 when we do the measurements, then it'll be unreal. So the question is, when we have differences between certificate year after year and some that are very old, I think just be worth putting on your radar, because there are a few people who don't agree with it.
We'll work with our friends at Australian Sailing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Wade, for those questions and comments. Just from a CYC perspective, it's Tom Barker here again for those online who may not recognise the voice. But just from a club perspective, watch out for the communications starting with the Noak Sydney Gold Coast race. The club has taken the strong advice and putting in place technical committees for our major events as well. And that is designed to assist owners and competitors with that protest process and provide another avenue, which is a well-established process under the racing rules of sailing and whatnot. So watch out for those communications that are starting throughout this week, and technical committees are part of the club's steps that we're putting in place to help address some of those questions and comments you raised as well. So I just wanted to add that to close out that comment. Yeah, with that, hand over to Commodore Sam.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I would like to thank everyone for attending tonight and having the opportunity to discuss IRC and the changes to the rule, the latest updates and so forth. And very much to thank RORC and Jenny and Jason for attending and giving us such a deep insight into the latest. Quite a few things which came up tonight go to show that we have to be very mindful of how we ride our notices of race, how we address our regattas, particularly with the changes, for instance, for the headstalls. And I think the club is also very keen to keep IRC as our #1 rating system. We have a lot of confidence in it, but we're always trying to make sure that that rating system is worthy of that confidence. So again, thanks a lot for attending. Thank you for everyone who contributed tonight. And yeah, the club's open, so if anyone would like to go down and have a drink or something, please make yourselves welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks a lot.